I'm at the Globsec Security Forum in Bratislava, Slovakia, and I'm joined by the former US-appointed Islamic State Coalition Coordinator, General John Allen. Many thanks for being with me on the programme.
Great to be with you.
Given the gains that the Islamic State militant group is making, do you get the impression that we're in this for the long run?
Well, we have to be. And I would make sure we're clear that there are areas where they're not making gains. There are areas where they're experiencing some significant reverses. But the difference of where this organization is today than where it was 18 months ago is that there has emerged a constellation of what they call distant provinces, wilayats. And those range from North Africa all the way to Southeast Asia. And that's a troubling development. We're going to have to watch that closely and probably deal with it in a regional manner. But the challenge, I think, will come from the global network that ties those provinces together to the center in Iraq and Syria. That's really what we have to watch closely.
When there is a clamping down on Syria and Iraq and the stronghold there, will this group then lash out in its global network? In Europe, for example, has just happened recently.
Well, we're seeing it now. That's exactly what's happening. The more we pressure them, the more they're going to want to relieve that pressure by attacking in other places. If they attack in Western Europe, for example, they'll bring terror to the populations of the coalition. They'll seek to create a fracture, potentially, in the coalition, or at least to disturb the cohesion of the coalition. So we should expect it. And that's another reason why we have to understand this network.
And if Syria and Iraq are anything to go by, one can't help but assume that terrorists like a vacuum. And if we see this hotbed of terrorism in Brussels, in Belgium, which is by many accounts a dysfunctional state at the moment, would that seem a coincidence to you that this group have embedded themselves there?
I'd put it a little differently than a vacuum. I think what these groups look for are seams. Between countries, seams within countries, between capabilities, potentially the intelligence organization or law enforcement or counterterrorism, and where they can find these seams, which might be called cool spots, they'll look for those, and they'll look for them to be support bases and platforms for planning and assembly areas potentially for attacks.
And if we look at then traditional forms of warfare, say if a decisive offensive was launched against the caliphate, what impact then would that have upon this global network that you were describing?
Well, the decisive offensive has to be all-inclusive. It can't just be about the caliphate in what we call the core region in Iraq and Syria. So the decisive offensive would seek to simultaneously disrupt the network at the same time that we continue to pressure the core. So that the entire entity, the provinces, the network, and the core, all of them are under pressure simultaneously.
But how is that possible? Because then if we look at the network, we look at these groups that have hidden themselves, you're dealing with invisible enemy at times, that's kind of acting beneath the radar, able to make bombs at home.
It seems that way now. We're still working the process through the intelligence services of the region. In cooperation with our intelligence to understand the network. It seems now that they are invisible. It seems now that they're everywhere. Truth is, with the right kinds of intelligence work, we can both find them, we can figure out what will be the key nodes that are valuable to them or the critical pathways that they must trod in order to be effective. And the comprehensive attack you've talked about is a relentless effort to interrupt that network and to disrupt that network so that they're constantly on the defensive, not us. That process continues right now. We have to build the intelligence on that network, and that's really only begun recently.
Our response to this seems to have been quite slow.
I would simply say that the organizational approaches that we have to pursue need to understand where these seams are, seams between functions, seams between organizations.
Are you satisfied, though, with the kind of offensive?
No, well, we're not in the offensive yet. What we need to do is organize in a manner that is comprehensive, where we can share the kinds of information that is important, work closely with the security services in countries, the law enforcement, counterterrorism, in a comprehensive way so that as we understand this network, we can attack it relentlessly, and that's important. And that's just beginning to emerge now.
So were you frustrated when you were in your post with a lack of intelligence sharing on this issue?
I won't say I was frustrated, but I was certainly attentive to the fact that we needed to do more, and I think that process is unfolding now.
Were you given the tools by US President Obama to be able to do what you wanted to do in order to kind of stop this group?
We did, but the process that we are understanding unfold now, this network process, had really only become visible to us as I was leaving the job. But otherwise, I was satisfied that I had the support.
And we've seen that there have been attempts with the Taliban to negotiate with them. Do you ever see that there'll be a point where we could negotiate with the Islamic State?
I don't think that it's going to be the case. They are relentlessly in the attack against the West. It's inherent in their doctrine.
So what would be, you've talked about many-pronged attack on this group. Given the likelihood that that is going to be quite difficult to put into place, at least in the short term, what would you advise military leaders to do?
This didn't start in a very short period of time. It's not going to end in a short period of time. Many of the reasons that Daesh exists at all is a long-term dissatisfaction in the region by hundreds and thousands of individuals who've been radicalized and can find a home in an extremist organization. So at the very same time that we're dealing with this organization as a threat, we need to be dealing with the underlying causal factors that alienate and disenfranchise such large segments of the populations in the region. So this is a long-term solution, and we have to recognize that, we've got to organize for that, and we have to begin the process of a comprehensive approach that deals with the underlying factors while we deal with the groups and defend ourselves in the process.
And are you confident that Daesh can be beaten?
Oh, I think so. The challenge for us is not about beating Daesh in the physical space. The challenge for us will be beating Daesh in the information space. They've got a very powerful message. We've worked hard in the first year and a half to be organized to oppose that message. And I think in the end, both in terms of addressing those underlying causal factors and also competing directly against that message, that's going to be the challenge. And when we can compete with that message and overcome that message, then Daesh will be defeated.
General John Allen, many thanks for joining us on the program.
Pleasure to be with you today. Thanks very much.